how powerful it is, though, the reality that it is a liar. And so today, as we get back into this message, back into this series, on this message about fear, what would Jesus say about the emotion of fear? I want to start with the sermon text today. John 14:27 says, "Peace I leave with you." Jesus is talking. He says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." And afraid, also a synonym for afraid, is fearful. And so he's saying, don't be fearful. Don't be frightened. Don't cringe all the time. And so, but what are you afraid of? What gives you goosebumps racing up and down your spine? What is it that you hear, you see, whatever, you smell maybe, and then all of a sudden it's like, and maybe you get a little bad taste in your mouth. That thing that makes you go, oh, you get knots in your stomach, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to be around that, ooh, you know? And so what is it that makes you maybe throw up just a little bit in your mouth, right? What is that thing that you fear, that thought, that smell, that action, whatever that you fear? Maybe it's for some of us it might be snakes. I know I can speak freely on this. Stacy would tell you, yes, that's one of hers. And maybe some of you, I've heard people say they're afraid of frogs and toads. I'm like, I don't get that, but okay. But they're like, well, they jump all over and their tongue goes like that, and it's like, but it's not going to eat you. And so, but I don't get it. But some people it's heights, right? Fear of heights, and some people it's spiders. Sometimes it's might be like cockroaches. I've heard people who are afraid of cockroaches. Maybe maggots. That's been one I've been told. And so anyway. Bats. How about bats? Okay, so we're going to talk about bats a little today, baby. Bats, baby. Right on. We'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so there's something that we're all afraid of. We all have our fears. It's just a fact that we do. Several years ago, I think it was right somewhere around 2000. There was a short 6-7 year series of it's called Fear Factor, and it was about all these people. They put them in containers and whatever. They had to go into these places and they get covered up with stuff. Right? And it was all about fear, and it kind of freaked them out. And normally it would start out with 3 contestants. There'd be 3 guys, 3 gals. Interestingly, it's like every one of them was a model. For those who watched, right? I mean, like ugly people like me, we couldn't go on there. If you're out of weight, you can't be on there, right? You just had to be perfect, what the world calls a 10, I thought that was interesting, but I thought it was also funny because all them really pretty girls, they got really freaked out, and so that maybe wasn't nice, but it was just an interesting side note. So anyway, so what they do, they come on this show for an hour. TV hour. They'd spend getting the bejeebies scared out of them in hopes of winning the $50,000 prize for the week. And so in there they would have, again, they would be in boxes with all these snakes. They'd be boxes with all the cockroaches, boxes. They have mealworms. There was one where they had to, the one gal had to, I don't remember what she coated her, poured all over whatever, and then she rolled around in this box of like mealworms, only I think they called them fireworms or something. And so anyway, so she's got all these bugs all over. Then there's another gal has to take, and only with her mouth, take those bugs and fill a cup up to the line with those bugs, right? So I'm like, to me, that was gross. I don't think it was fearful, but I probably would have Ralphed on that one. It wouldn't have just been a little in the mouth, right? But anyway, but the snakes, right? There's some people who be really, really freaked out right there, right? Fire ants, different things like that, right? Even the maggots. I've seen multiple ones where they had those in there. And then also there was times that they had you eat certain things, in like eyes, brains, bugs. They also had you eat, I remember there was one episode at least that they had you eat certain animal parts we won't talk about in here. I was just like, but how, would you eat it? Could you eat it? Are you afraid of it? That sort of thing, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one time he said the only thing we have to fear is he never watched Fear Factor. I'm just saying, but right. And so, but I personally could not have survived that. I know I wouldn't have, right? Because like there's some things you'd be in there, I'd be like, yeah, I could do that. That's no problem. But then there's like, oh, there's no way I'd ever come near that, right? And so, what is it that you're afraid of? Where's your fear at? And especially when it comes to the Lord and what God's calling you to do, what are you afraid of? And some of you would say, I'm not afraid of anything. And I got to tell you, you're a liar. Okay, so medical journal after medical journal has said over and over again, one in particular said the man who knows no fear is not only a gross exaggeration, he is a biological impossibility. Every one of us is afraid of something. Maybe not freaked out, screaming, crawling out the window at 30,000 feet afraid, right? But afraid of something. And so fear factor had you learned some of the things, you could see it in your eyes, right? I mean, because there was some on there that would say those things like, oh, well, I don't mind the snakes, that's fine. But yet, then she's like, oh, but not the cockroaches. I was hoping they wouldn't do the cockroaches, right? And so there was something they were afraid of. Oh, I got it. I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. But oh, no, not that, right? And so we all are there. We all have our own fears. And sometimes that fear is a fear of failure. And sometimes when we try to overcome our fears, because we should be able to overcome our fears, for the most part at least tone them down, right? But we should be able to overcome our fears when we think of them in the light of Jesus Christ, right? Because he will remove all of our fears for us if we allow him to. And so, but sometimes the fear is the one who conquers. Fear becomes the overcomer. And I believe that most of the time when we're God's calling us to do something, to follow him, fear conquers because we refuse to do it because I'm afraid of whatever it is we're afraid of. And so, fear is one of our base emotions. They say there's a fear, hunger, love, and hate are our four base emotions, they say. And it's not limited just to humans, by the way. Check out the animal kingdom. Fear runs throughout the animal kingdom. Oh, no, the lion's not afraid. Oh, yeah, he is. Watch Animal Planet a little bit, okay? So there's things that the lion is afraid of, right? There's things, every animal has something it's afraid of. Every animal is susceptible to being harmed or eaten by another animal. They have fear. It's called survival instinct. To avoid this, why am I avoiding it? Because I'm afraid of it, because it's going to cause me harm. So, you might even say that fear is a gift from God because it helps us to live. Afraid of the train, so I'm not going to step in front of the train. Whereas I had a brother that I'm pretty sure if we'd had a train come by the house very often, I'm pretty sure he'd have tried talking us boys into racing the train, and I'm pretty sure of it because he seemed to have fear of virtually nothing. Except for relationships. There was that, but and so, but anyway, Leonardo da Vinci said, just as courage imperils life, fear protects it. My brother was really courageous in a lot of things, but quite a few of those things could have killed him. In fact, most of those things could have killed him, right? But fear protects us. Fear protects our life. Fear is what keeps us from doing 120 mile an hour down the gravel road on loose gravel. Okay? Fear is what keeps us from stepping off the edge of the 10-story building, right? Because we don't want to die, but man, what would it be like to walk on air, I could tell you a 6-foot ladder was high enough, and I wouldn't recommend it, okay? So we don't want to do that anymore. So fear, right? Fear is what keeps us from doing these unhealthy things, these things that can take our life. But people continue to try to overcome their fears, and rightfully, I don't think that's wrong. We need to overcome our fears because what? Fear is what? It's a liar. And Satan brings in the fear. Because if we're living following Jesus Christ, we got nothing to fear. Okay? If we're following his plan, his path, we got nothing to fear. So we need to overcome those, but overcoming that fear is kind of hard sometimes, isn't it? Um, Fear of flying. There was a time I was on the plane, and the lady who was sitting beside the window seat, asked me to take if she could have my aisle seat. Now I like the aisle seat. These things aren't short, and planes don't have room, right? And so I'm like, why? And she says, because I have a fear of flying, but I need to travel. And she had a relative who was ill, and so she's going to go visit. And she said, I have a fear of flying, so I bought a window seat because I wanted to overcome the fear. Now, mind you, we're sitting in the tarmac at Sioux Falls International Airport. Okay, we're sitting on the tarmac. Yeah, we haven't pulled the walkway away, nothing. And she's like, I'm not going to be able to overcome this. She goes, would you mind changing? Because she said, otherwise, I'm going to be using that bag. And I said, I don't want you to use the bag. I'll exchange seats with you. Fear. She was trying to overcome it, and she did. She really did. For a person who's afraid of flying, she really did a pretty good job. But we continue to try to overcome fear. In fact, when it comes to flying, studies show that 30% of people are afraid to fly, yet they'll do it when they have to. Mom's sick, she's cross country. They say I got to be there within the next day or two, or I'm not going to be able to talk to her. I'm going to fly, even if I'm thrown up the whole way, right? We try to overcome our fears. I have a fear of riding in a car. My daughters are much better now than they used to be, and so I can ride with them. My wife still has a fear of riding in a car with me, so But there are people who are, right. They're afraid of that. But I overcame my fear of riding in a car with them because I'm an overcomer. And we all need to become overcomers, right? We all need to work on those fears. Bats. I said that we'd talk about bats. I had many years ago, long before I'd even met my wife, I had a dream about bats. I got to a place where bats were like, no, just stay away from me, right? But I had this dream that it was dark, it's pitch dark and all that. I'm outside somewhere, obviously, and there's these bats flying. I'm watching the bats flying around, and all of a sudden there's a bat about that wide and about that tall flying, and he comes and he plants on my face. And I know he's about that wide because his little bat wings wrapped around in my dream, okay, thankfully, in my dream, right? And he wouldn't and I know he was about that tall because I could see my hair, but I couldn't see my chin, but I could see my neck, right? So I know he was about that tall. And so I was like, I woke up in a panic, right? And I was like, I'm not going near bats anymore, right? I'm going to avoid bats at all costs. Didn't help that same brother, Mr. Courageous, didn't help that he was constantly telling me how all bats have rabies. They're all going to bite you. They're all going to kill you. And they get tangled up in your hair. And I used to have what that haircut, mullet haircut, right? And so they were, so I'm like always going to have, I got bats all over. So I was freaked out by bats. I would like, the bats are outside. I'm like, yeah, I'll go in the house or crawl underneath this patio, whichever gets me away from the bat faster, right? And so, thankfully, my next younger brother, Herman, many of you know him, thankfully, he's more afraid of bats because it was really embarrassing otherwise the one night him and I and our wives and my oldest brother and his wife, or his girlfriend, we're at their place and they have a bat coming. We're playing pinochle. We're doing marathon pinochle. And this bat comes in and across the table right in the room with us. Of course, he wasn't really like that because they're just like all over, right? I don't know how anyone could be afraid of him, really. But anyway, so he flies in the room. Herman, if you remember, some of you older folks remember they used to have those telephone tables, the telephone desk seat thing. So it was about that tall. You have a seat about that big, and you have a little table about that big, right? But it's only about that tall. Now, Herman's 6 foot, okay? So 5'11", 6 foot. Herman fit underneath that, over in the corner. I was so embarrassed with mine because all I did is hid behind Joe, and so I was okay. But right, so fear of bats. But then what I did to overcome this fear, well, I started studying bats because I no longer believed my Mr. Courageous brother, and I started actually studying about bats and finding out how helpful they are, right? Because before was like, give me anything to kill that thing because we need to wipe them all out. They should never be around, right? But the reality is, I'm so glad that they are. I got over that fear of bats. Now, the reason this is funny today is because last week, y'all remember Joe and I went to Omaha. Part of what we did on Saturday was we went to the Omaha Zoo. And so they have a place that's called Kingdoms of the Night, and you go down in this cave-like place, right? And you go down in there, and you start, well, guess what's in there? There's bats in there. But they're all behind, they've got the glass, and the exhibit's got this glass there, and so you can see the vampire bat, the fruit bat, the whatever bat, the other bat, the big bats, the little bats, all those bats, right? And so you're walking around checking them out, and it's pretty cool. We're hearing this squeak, 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 squeak noise, right? And I'm like, they must have the PA on, the music track or whatever you want to call it, right? Of these bats, right? As we're going along, we're getting towards the end. It's like, man, it's starting to stink in here. It's like, oh, they must have had a bad water leak or something. They got some mold going. I don't know what that is. Well, no, then we come to this exhibit, and it's this big exhibit, and it's got the big window, and it's got window up to about here, and then the top 1.5 to 2 foot is mesh. Okay, so it's like, oh, so we're smelling the guano is what we're doing, okay? Did you know they used to mine that? They really did. Bat poo is called guano. They actually used to mine. They had gold mines, silver mines, salt mines, and guano mines in the Old West. And they used it for fertilizer. And so they would literally go. So anyway, we got to see fertilizer and smell it. And so we're like, but I'm like, oh, okay, they're still. And Joe was getting a little anxious, but she's like, well, there's a net. We're okay. And so we go along and get to the final exhibit. And we're there, we're talking, and you could still smell the guano. And she goes, there's no net up there. And I'm looking at all these. There's literally hundreds of bats in this little, probably 8-foot stretch of bat cave, manufactured bat cave. And there are a couple hundred of them at least up there, and they're all crawling over each other, moving around. And she goes, there's no net. And I'm like, ooh, that must have got ripped down or something. And I'm looking, I'm like, no, there's not been a net up there at all. Talk about getting the experience, right? So Joe's like, okay, we're done. Okay, we're leaving now. And so as we're heading to the exit, which is just there, we're heading there. We start talking with someone. I don't remember who it was. We were talking with someone. And so we're talking, and all of a sudden, Joe goes, one just flew by. And I said, one what? And she goes, a bat just flew over our heads. Let's go. She goes. And so apparently one of the bats was mingling. And so I did the appropriate loving husband thing and laughed really loud. And so I said, okay, honey, let's go. And so we go out. So we go out into, it was I believe that was the rainforest was outside of that. So we go out into the inner exhibit. And so we're in there and we're walking around, and pretty soon, well, I'm like, oh, there's a bat. Oh, there's a bat. Not thinking anything of it, right? And so we go around, and as we're leaving, you get to there's one more exhibit, and there's the exit. And so we're arm locked, right? And so as we're going, I go, oh, look, honey, here's this exhibit. And she's like, what? And I said, oh, this is your favorite one. This is your bats. As I start walking over towards, because it's the other side. And so all the bats, and you're watching hundreds of bats just climbing all over each other, right? And so she's of course, she does the loving thing and about pulls my arm out of the socket so we could head to the exit. I did the loving husband thing and left again. And so my wife was not over her fear of bats. Me, I was ready to walk up to it. But anyway, so we all have these fear. Now, I think the biggest driving force for me to overcome my fear of bats was so that I could root on Batman, because we all know he killed Superman, right? And so we know if you're going to cheer for a superhero, you got to go for Batman. But how do you... Anyway, yeah, it's one of them, one of the movies. So anyhow, man, I just talked through about like two pages of my notes. That's good. So anyway, so I laughed. Oh, so the four greatest motivators: fear, hope, love, and faith. Fear is always listed first. Fear is the greatest of, they say it's first in order, it's first in force, and it's also first in fruit. At least for the majority of people, anyway. typically speaking, that's where it's come. When they say, what's the most motivating thing in your life? It is fear, and they can narrow it down, right? And so the Bible mentions fear. You ever notice how God like mentions things that many times that he knows we're going to struggle with? Fear is listed in the Bible 266 times. Afraid is listed in the Bible 223 times. That's 489 times. Fear or fearfulness, remember fearful is the synonym of afraid. Fear or fearfulness is listed in the Bible. And the first time it's mentioned is in Genesis 3:10. The last time it's mentioned is Revelation 19:5. And so if fear is listed or a version of it is listed, we got to know Jesus said something about fear. And actually, Jesus tells people 15 times throughout the Gospels, just in the Gospels, 15 times to not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Fear not. Now he doesn't want us to just be foolish, right? Oh, they're just lions. Go on in there and play with the big kitties. That's not it, right? I mean, he wants us to be wise, but he wants us not to be fearful of things that he's already overcome. If we're following Jesus Christ, he's already laid out the path. He's already conquered the path. He's already taken care of what we're afraid of, right? And he's saying, don't be foolishly afraid of this. Don't be afraid of this. Don't be dumb, but don't be afraid, right? Of depending on the instance. Luke 12, verse 7 says, it's Jesus is talking. He says, indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Jesus is saying to us, he says, do not be afraid to live. Don't be afraid to live. That's what he's telling us. He wants us to live our life knowing we don't have anything to be afraid of. Oftentimes what we do, we're so afraid of not having. I don't have. Jesus wants us to live. And so often we spend so much time trying to earn a living that we never start to live. So often we're so worried about trying to earn a living that we never actually start to live. And that actually was pretty obvious to me this last weekend. Because even though I'm all about living and living for the Lord, we hadn't taken any time. And I'd failed to live with my wife. I'd failed to celebrate with my wife. I'd failed to take time in her and me and God. We got to stop worrying about earning a living or forcing a living and start living the life that God's given us. We got to come to that place that we understand that no matter what, God's got our best at heart. He knows what we need and what we don't need, and all he wants to do is just shower us with his love, and he wants us to love others. Thing is, we can choose to worry about everything, or we can choose to trust God, but we cannot do both. You cannot fully trust God and still be worried about everything, having fear over everything. It's your choice what you want to do. Will you fully trust God? There's where we fail. We're like, no, I trust God, just not over here, just not on this. In order for us to fully trust God as we're called to do, if we're doing that, we're not going to be frightened and worried and freaking out over our life. We won't have fear. I love, there's a story talking about fears, right? Because we worry about what might happen. What if it happens, right? And we worry about what might be the consequences of things. And we never ever take the step and do what we need to do, what God's calling us to do. And I love the story. There's a story that I heard a while back about a bishop who had this irrational fear that his legs were going to stop being functional. They were going to become paralyzed. And so he's at this dinner and this gala thing, and as he's sitting there, He reaches under the table and pinches his leg. And all of a sudden he exclaims, just as I feared, just as I feared, catch the word, just as I feared, paralysis has set into my legs. I can't feel anything from the hips down. And the lady sitting beside him said, sir, if it helps, that was my leg you pinched. How often do we pinch someone else's leg, though, and suddenly our fear is alive? What we feared, we were so focused on the fear that we actually pinch someone else's leg and we think that ours is dead. Happens all the time. So don't be afraid to live. Mark 5, verse 36. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him being Jairus, told him, don't be afraid, just believe. And that's number 2, is don't be afraid, just believe. Just believe. We don't need to be afraid. Jesus says, don't be afraid. Don't be fearful. Just believe. That's what Jesus says. Jairus was a synagogue leader. Man, if anyone's going to understand how God's got us all in his hand, right, taking care of us, you'd think Jairus was that one, right? You'd think he would be one. He comes to Jesus. He'd heard Jesus was in the neighborhood, in the community, and he goes to him because he's got a sick daughter. He goes to him, and in Mark 5, verse 22, says, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. So he falls at Jesus' feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. So now, as they leave, they're on their way to Jairus' house so Jesus can heal Jairus' daughter. And this smacked a whole lot of I just lost my name. Lazarus. Right? The Lazarus story smacks a whole lot about that, right? So they're on their way, and as they're on their way to Jairus' house so Jesus can heal his daughter, a woman touches Jesus, and Jesus has a conversation with this woman. She's been bleeding for 12 years, and she's miraculously healed just by touching the hem of his cloak. And so Jesus stops and has a conversation with her. And remember we talked about the whole thing about parents shouldn't outlive their kids, right? Kids should bury parents, not parents bury kids, right? And so as they're here, I just envision as they're here, Jairus, knowing his daughter is very, very ill, right? He knows we're going, but Jesus, but we were going to my house. Why are you wasting? She's been bleeding for 12 years. She'll be okay for a couple more hours. It'll be okay, dude. Come on. Let's go to my house, my little girl. Right? Our scriptures don't tell us that, but I think with my heart, and I'm like, I probably would have been sitting there going, come on, man. Like my wife when we're in the bat cave, wanting to get out of there. He's wanting to, so I just envision that, right? Sometimes we need to put our heart into the word, right? We need to, how were they really feeling? How would they have felt, right? And I'm not saying just go crazy nuts with it and just whatever you feel is the right thing, because you're probably afraid of something. I'm just saying. So Jairus is there. He's waiting. Jesus is talking to this lady who's already been bleeding 12 years. She ain't died. She hasn't bled out yet. She's probably going to be okay for a little while longer. And Jairus receives the news. His little girl's dead. It hits home a lot more today than it did when this message was written. It's a lot more home. He hears his daughter's dead. And we think of it as parents, we're like, that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not the way but the reality is this, right? Parents aren't supposed to bury their children, but maybe they are. Because it happens. And I trust God's sovereignty. It happens. I've had it happen a number of times in my family. A number of times. 30-ish years ago, I don't remember exactly how many, I don't keep track. About 30 years ago, my Mr. Courageous brother died in a trucking accident. And I remember my parents, my dad especially, over and over again. Parents aren't supposed to bury their kids. Parents aren't supposed to bury their kids. Parents aren't supposed to bury their kids. About a month later, his brother, my uncle, and his wife buried their son, who was about 2 years younger than me, about a month later because of a motorcycle accident. Troy's was a trucking accident. Todd's was a motorcycle accident. And they too. Then my dad and my uncle are sitting together. Parents aren't supposed to bury their kids. Parents aren't supposed to bury their kids. Now two of us are burying our kids, right? I have another aunt and an uncle, my mom's sister, her family, uh, closer to 40 years ago. Well, no, it'd be about 30. It'd still be about that 30 mark, I guess. Um, but anyway, they end up burying their oldest son to cancer. About 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they buried their oldest daughter to cancer. Parents aren't supposed to bury their kids, though. Or are they? I know another aunt and uncle, my mom's sister and her husband, um, buried their little 4 or 5 year old daughter. This was about 40 years ago from a farming accident. Her daddy's the one who was driving the tractor that pulled the feed wagon over her. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. They're not supposed to, but at least most of those, not the last one, but the other ones were all, at least they were adults, right? They got to live to be adults because we say, well, you're not supposed to bury your, just definitely not the little ones, not the great granddaughter, right? That Steve and Wendy are currently processing through, right? But that 4 or 5 year old, I also have a cousin who just a few weeks ago lost their second premature but born daughter in the last 3 years. The last one, premature, born, everything's going good, died. This one, 2 months old, passes away. But parents aren't supposed to bury their children. Well, I think we still need to trust in God's plan. Jesus says to Jairus has just found out. Jesus says what? Jairus, mind you, check out the faith Jairus has, right? He's one of the synagogue leaders, which means he's a Jewish leader in Jesus' day, and the Jewish leaders are the ones who railroaded Jesus to the cross, right? And so think about this. But yet he had enough faith. He reminds me a little bit of Nicodemus, right? He had enough faith that he heard Jesus is in town. He heard he's this miracle worker. He don't know about this whole Messiah thing, but he's like, he's a miracle worker. He's in town. My little girl's on the cusp of dying. I'm going to go visit him because I trust he's the one who can heal. So he's shown the faith in Jesus. He's shown the faith that Jesus is going to be able to heal his daughter. And he goes and gets him, and what's Jesus do? He says, just have a little faith. Don't be afraid. You've had this faith. Can you have just a little more faith? That's what he's asking him. Have some more faith. Trust me. Trust me. So if you don't know the story, they continue to go to Jairus' house. Yes, Jairus' daughter's dead. Jesus kicks everyone out. Kicks everyone out except for Jairus, his wife, Peter, James, John. And they all are in the girl's room. And Jesus stands there and tells her to wake up. And she does. And she does. Do we have that kind of faith? Do we trust Jesus that he can raise the dead? I got a boo-boo. Man, I hope God will fix it so it don't get infected. Do we trust that he'll raise the dead? Because our Bible does say, same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Those miracles he performed then, he can perform today, and he'll perform them tomorrow. He's just using different disciples to do it. He's allowing us to be a part of it. Far too often, we believe he can do a miracle. We just don't have the faith that it'll actually happen. It reminds me of the little boy who's sitting in his house and he's looking out the back window at the dirt pile that's there. He's read his Bible, and the Bible says if you have enough faith and you believe, command the mountain to move and it'll move. And the little boy's sitting there looking at the dirt pile that mom and dad have given him instruction he needs to move. And he closes his eyes and he prays. He says, dirt pile, be moved. And he waits a couple minutes and then he opens his eyes and he goes, just as I thought, it's not moved. How often do we pray, Lord, heal? Oh, just as I thought. No healing there. Wasn't a miracle. Lord, fix what I've messed up. Whatever, you put your whatever in there. Joe and I with our marriage. Lord, fix our marriage. Well, great. Yep, he didn't do that. I knew he wouldn't. We do it over and over again. Someone's sick in the hospital, got cancer. Lord, please give him a full healing. I trust you can give him full healing. And then when there's not a full healing, yep, just what I figured. We claim that we believe that God will do, yet we have no faith that he'll do it. And then we can't figure out why more miracles don't happen. Between that and the fact we deny miracles all the time. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Believe a little more. Believe a little more. The only thing faith will ask of you is that you believe. It's the only thing faith requires is that you believe. Matthew 8:26. He replied, he being Jesus, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Number 3, don't be afraid to trust. Don't be afraid to trust. To help put this story in perspective, this is one of the great stories of the Bible. To put in perspective, Jesus has just delivered the Sermon on the Mount. He's just healed Peter's mother-in-law, and he's healed the centurion's servant. I think he's a little tired and wants a little quiet time, right? He tells the boys, get in the boat, let's go across the Sea of Galilee. We're going to cross. And so they get in the boat, because the crowds are just crowding, right? And so they get in the boat, they leave, they go, and as they leave, everything's good. But as they get about halfway across the Sea of Galilee, this storm comes up. Now Jesus, he gets on the boat. What's he do? He's like, I need a little chill time. I need to rest up a little bit. So he goes to the back of the boat and goes to sleep. I think though part of it was, do they really believe and have faith? I think was part of that heart also. See, our scriptures sometimes they leave room for us to interpolate a little bit, and when we do that, I believe that was part of it. How much do they believe? How much faith do they have? So if we go back to the story, Matthew 8:24, suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us! We're going to drown." And and then we find the scripture that I just shared a minute ago. He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. In the disciples' defense, in their defense a little bit, we think boat nowadays, right? And we're like, oh yeah, you can't even capsize them things. Oh, there's all the safety stuff, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't a cruise ship. It wasn't a fancy modern boat. Most likely, they believe it was a open hull boat, a small fishing boat. Mind you, I said small, and there's 13 guys on it when normally there'd be a couple guys fishing. Okay, so there's room for a couple guys and some fish. So they've probably overloaded this boat a little bit. So in our human mind, we could see where, maybe there'd be a little fear going on. But they got Jesus, right? I mean, he just did a couple healings, got in the boat, took a nap. And they get all freaked out and they're worried they're going to drown. But check this out, though. The first thing they say, Lord, save us. They still had faith that he could save them. They had a little struggle with the fact that you're sleeping in the boat with the waves going on, with the storm going on. But they still, the first thing they say is, Lord, save us. First thing isn't we're going to drown. First thing is we have the Lord in the boat. Lord, save us. How often we know God can save us, Jesus can save us, the Holy Spirit can save us. We know we can be saved, and yet, we're just going to drown. Is it in debt? isn't in divorce, isn't in addiction, whatever it's in. Oh, we're going to drown. Oh, Lord, could you help out here? Instead of our first response being, Lord, save me from the alcohol. Lord, save me from the addiction. Lord, save me. Lord, save our marriage. Instead of it being, Lord, save, well, I guess that dirt pile's never going to move. One thing we have to remember, one lesson I want to share with you this week from this is that we have to remember that in the midst of the storms, we can still trust Jesus. In the midst of the storm, Jesus is still there. So often we turn to ourselves, we turn to our buddy, we turn to whoever. Jesus is right in the boat with us. I don't care what storm it is. He's right there with us, and he says, don't be afraid. Have faith, ye of little faith. Why are you so afraid? The Bible does not promise that the Christian life is storm-free. The Bible promises Jesus will always be in the boat. God will never leave you, never forsake you, no matter what your storm is. That's what the Bible promises. Do we have faith in that? Do we believe it? Isaiah 43, verse 1 and 2 says, but now this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. Does it say if? It doesn't say if even once in there. It says when you walk through the flames, when you're in the water, when. Over and over again, when you're in the flames, you'll not be ablaze. So don't be afraid, just trust him. It's easy to trust God on a nice, sunny, bluebird kind of day. It's easy to, God's got it all under, we got this gorgeous day, God's got it under control. But you know what, when we were in Omaha and them tornadoes were going on, guess what? God still had it in control. He still had his hand all over it. I had zero fear. Zero. I know there were some of y'all back here who were like, ain't they in Omaha? Are they okay? Yeah, and I thank you for being concerned. But the reality is I knew God was still in control. I don't care how many storms are going on. It doesn't matter. God's in control. And we have to remember that. We have to trust him. Luke 5, verse 9 says, for he and all his companions, he being Peter, he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. Number 4, don't be afraid to follow. Don't be afraid to follow. They left their, most likely, generational fishing business. Their dad was there. We know it's at least 2 generations. They left their family business to go and follow Jesus. Well, I can never be a preacher because they don't make enough money. Then you're not following Jesus, you're following the dollar. We can't do that. We can't buy tickets for the Canaries game. We can't afford it unless God's prompted us to do so, because he will provide. We can't go, we can't do, we can't. Is God in it or not? Are you following Jesus or not? But I have to work 80 hours a week or I'll never make enough money. Are you following Jesus or not? Are you doing what God's called you to do? As a follower of Jesus Christ, the only thing we have to worry about is, am I staying on the path that Christ has blazed for me? He's already overcome it. Just get on the path. Just get on the path. Follow Jesus. short story of I'm not going to go into the whole thing. I've shared it before, but my journey to become a pastor. As I reflect, and it's been so much this week as I've been reflecting on this message, and as I reflect, before I didn't think I didn't understand, I didn't know what God was calling me to do. As I reflect, I realize that actually I was afraid to follow God. My 2-year journey wasn't so much of a 2-year argument or anything. It was a 2 years of me rejecting to do what he wanted me to do because I thought there's no way I can do it, because I would have to give up my alcohol. I'd have to work on giving up my temper. I'd have to stop the party thing. I'd have to actually, apparently pastors go to church like pretty much every week, apparently. And I'd have to start going to church instead of being in the church and wanting to be there every week. I realized I was afraid of what I would have to get. What about my wife? My wife's going to leave me if I become a pastor. I literally thought that for a period of time. I thought, there's no way. Joe will flat out, we'll be divorced if I say yes to this. I didn't realize it until this week that fear drove me. Fear kept me from following him. Fear kept me from committing to what he's calling me to do. It was all fear. And all this time I've been like, I just didn't understand. I just didn't know what he was calling me to. I did. Fear. Are we going to follow Jesus? What is it Jesus is asking you to give up? What is it he's asking you to stop being afraid of? What is it he's asking you to step forward into? What path is he asking you to walk down? That he's already gone down it, so that all you got to do is follow him. What one do you have? What one do you have? The love for God? Do you have the freedom from hatred? The freedom from fear for? What is it that you're still hanging out in the fear zone? What is it right now? You're still in the box on Fear Factor with the snakes and the lizards and the whatever crawling. What is it that you have going on that you're afraid to do what God's asking you to do? Because you know, if you will be honest with yourself, and if you sit there and Lord, what is it you want me to do? And he's telling you, and you know you're hearing it, but I don't want to give up my 4 vacations every year. I don't want to give up all this retirement pay I got going. I don't want to give up. I don't want to give up. I don't want to give up. But wait a minute, now they're going to want me to be in church. And the reality is, God doesn't want you to be in church. He wants you to be the church. He wants you to be the church. So I am not giving up every Sunday for God. What is it? I know God's calling me to this, but no way. People will look at me funny. They might call me a Jesus freak or a Bible thumper or one of those people. What is it you're afraid of? Father God, I ask you right now in this time, I ask you